In this lesson, we'll discuss Do the Right Thing by Spike Lee. First, we must consider the stereotypes that we talked before, starting with The Birth of a Nation, and see how it's been used by Spike Lee and possibly some other black filmmakers in a positive way. What we see in Do the Right Thing is that the characters were not developed fully. In fact, their names were not even known. They're mostly known as their various types. As we see in this picture, this is mother, sister. And the black audience actually identified with these characters. They knew people in their own lives who exemplify the same personalities that we see in the characters in Do the Right Thing. We also have to analyze white supremacy and how it can be manifested even in black film. First, we have to understand the lack of black representation in media, that there are few images, positive or negative, of black lives in media. When we do see black representations, also, it's often essentialized, like this is what blackness is. But we have to take into account this is one perspective of what blackness is from a particular filmmaker. Often, black representation by black filmmakers is often unchallenged, and this is the case with Spike Lee. He is seen as the black director, the black filmmaker, and when his films come out, people say, well, this is what black life is like, and often that's not the case. Just like any other racialized group, there's a variety of how blackness, whiteness, Asianness is in the United States. Black representation, when it's shown, is often blamed for causing more racial tension. When we talk about diversity, it's positive, but when we talk about race, in terms of who has and who does not have, it's often said to be a cause for dissension, that when we talk about these issues, it brings up tension and causes more problems than the idea of diversity or multiculturalism, which is about unification and celebrating culture and not taking into account various forms of oppression. We need to analyze race, class, and gender. And in the case of films by Spike Lee, and specifically Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee is telling stories from the from the underclass. However, he's coming from a middle class. He is showing what he thinks the underclass is like and how they have to overcome certain obstacles that he may himself may not have experienced being a person from the middle class. Lee often also tells stories from a masculinist perspective. Many of his films, especially his early films, often were degrading towards women, and they are often critiqued as being offensive towards women. Lee portrays life of Black America as if it's the only kind of Black America, and that is often part and parcel to how he's seen as the only Black director. And if you are not, if you're a Black person and not seen as what the media representation is of Blackness, then your Blackness, or who you are and your identity, is often challenged or questioned as not being authentic enough. During the 1980s, we were going through the Reagan-Bush era, and this is a time of major conservatism and the rising of the right, particularly Christian right. There was tremendous amount of discontentment and anger before and during this time that all the movements towards civil rights equality did not really manifest into anything. Race relations were in trouble. We see that there was more tension between specifically whites and blacks. We also see during this time the economic situation changing. We see the rise of the yuppie, which is a young and up-and-comer who's very materialistic, that they needed to have stuff to feel important or that they're a person. We also see the rise of the importance of entertainment. MTV was what was invented and broadcast during this time. We see images tied with music to spread messages and images of what what a particular culture is like. And one of those culture is rap. And rap at this time was becoming more popular not only amongst the black community and the underclass, but also amongst white middle class consumers. In Hollywood, we see different types of films coming out, one being the interracial buddy film. And the interracial buddy film is a story of interracial male bonding in which the cultural differences between the two people in the film are not important, or the differences do not exist. And one of the major blockbusters showing this is Beverly Hills Cop with Eddie Murphy. Other blockbusters of that time, blockbuster meaning major profits in movies, was E.T. by Steven Spielberg and also Pretty in Pink. There are other types of blockbusters as well, but it shows how important movies are and that major audiences are putting their dollars into the entertainment industry. At this time, we also see a growth of the African American demand for movies for blacks and about blacks, and that's when we see the rise of Spike Lee. The white response to black films, specifically ones with Spike Lee, Do the Right Thing for as one example, is that it incites racial violence. And a few years later, we see the Rodney King riot happen in Los Angeles. The player that we're going to discuss for Do the Right Thing is also the director and also one of the major actors in the movie, Spike Lee. Again, Spike Lee comes from the middle class. He lived in Brooklyn neighborhoods, and mostly these were white neighborhoods, and he had friends who were white, mostly Italian Americans. He went to college at Morehouse University in 1979, or when he graduated. He later went to NYU, New York University's film school, and he's one of only 2 black students in that cohort. Later on, he became the owner of the production company 40 Acres and a Mule, which is reminiscent of a time like after slavery, where former slaves were supposed to be guaranteed 40 acres and a mule to rise up from slavery and actually have a life. This promise was never kept. Spike Lee in his films is trying to force America to come grips with the problem of racism. Again, dealing with the black lives and how various white supremacist institutions are holding blacks into oppressive positions, subordinate positions. He knows that he has to make films that are also entertaining if he wants to make a profit. So he's trying to negotiate this idea of putting out films with a message that are also entertaining. Spike Lee also made it a point to provide employment in the entertainment industry for African Americans. He knows that whenever he makes progress, he's going to bring along other blacks with him into the entertainment industry. And we also have to note today that it's still, and black employment behind the camera is still lacking. Spike Lee is a highly acclaimed director, producer of film, and he has a variety of types of films, from just very entertainment focused to stories about racism to documentaries dealing with New Orleans post-Katrina. Some messages that we see that are very obvious in the film that we can analyze is that masculinity is tied to having a job and to various forms of ownership. And the mayor, played by Ossie Davis, is often seen as not masculine enough even by the young people in the community because he doesn't have a job. He drinks his problems away. He states that he couldn't find a job to support his 5 children. And so he has a positive message of doing the right thing, but he himself could not do that right thing. Mookie, also played by Spike Lee, attempts to reconcile the sociopolitical demands of blackness, what's good for the community, with his financial demands of life in a racist capitalist democracy. So he has to try to navigate this idea of being black and supporting black issues while working for a white capitalist franchise entity, Sal's Pizzeria. Again, the messages here, and even in the title, is do the right thing. But we must consider, what is the right thing? Is the right thing to find a different job for Mookie that isn't with an Italian American, to work with just black people in his community? And we have to think about, is the right thing the same for everybody? Every person has different parts of their identity and different circumstances. So what's right for one person, we should ask ourselves, is it right for all people? And how do social inequalities shape what is right? If you do not have financial means or the right kind of education or the right health status, are you going to do what is right according to someone else's definition of right? Another current event or current issue we should think about is about police brutality and police killings. We see Radio Raheem being killed, choked out by police officers. We also have seen that in these past few years blatantly in our various forms of media. Is police killings of black men and women justified if the black man or woman didn't do the right thing? For example, when Radio Raheem did not turn off the radio in Sal's Pizzeria. If he turned off that radio, would he still be alive? And would he later know not to put on his radio in white businesses? And again, this business was in a black community that was not really emphasizing the black community's culture within that pizzeria. So again, who's right, what is right, and who determines what is right is part of the message that this film is trying to get across. Next messages that we have to think about is double consciousness from W.E. Du Bois, of this idea of binary, like having to live in a white world but trying to maintain your black consciousness. This also is about American duplicity, having to negotiate two ends of the spectrum at the same time. So we have in the film this recurring image or images of Dr. MLK and Malcolm X shown by Smiley. Smiley is unable to verbally communicate his message, and basically what we see here is that Dr. MLK advocated for social justice by more of assimilationist, more of loving your enemy, whereas Malcolm X, they wanted the same kind of equality, but he said take care of your blackness first. He was more of a separatist, that he didn't want to have white allies to help him build up the black community. He could not see them as allies, rather he saw them as enemies. Other types of duplicities we saw in the film is Sal versus Bugging Out, the activist, Pino versus Vito. One brother loved black people, the other one hated them. DeMayer versus mother-sister. Jade versus Tina. Whiteness versus blackness. Cool versus heat. Love versus hate. The right thing versus the wrong thing. In the Spike Lee Reader, James C. McKelly argues that on the one hand, American democratic capitalism promotes to its ethnic constituents its promise of economic opportunity, material satisfaction, and social justice. On the other hand, it consistently fails to grant black Americans full and equal access to the socioeconomic structures upon which the fruits of this promise depend. So again, these males that we see shown in these videos, in this movie, they're trying to do the right thing, which is providing economically for their families. But again, these various social structures that are oppressive make this very hard for them to do. So what's right for a black middle class community may not be the same for a black underclass community, or what's good for a white community versus a black community. Not all of the characters in the film are conscious of the various forms of oppression that they're faced with. And this is dealing with something that all people who are not privileged have to face. We have a difficulty in identifying the real corruptive, oppressive powers in America. And instead, we fight one another instead of the various forces that are harming us all. So, implications. Why does this film matter, or films like this matter? We have to think about, can movies be profitable and still hold a political message? Again, Spike Lee tries to tell the truth, but at the same time make money. Can you do both at the same time? Lee has often been critiqued, especially for being kind of a sexist filmmaker. At the other time, he's not critiqued at all, even amongst black people or white people feel like he can't be critiqued or else that's racist. So his images become essentialist. So a question we must ask ourselves, is Lee's representation of African American life and the lack of criticism of his imagery promoting essentialism, meaning that all black people or all of a type of people are the same? So as quoted in the Spike Lee Reader, edited by Paul J. Massad, essentialism is, as Diana Fuss defines it, commonly understood as a belief in the real true essence of things, the invariable and fixed properties which define the whatness of a given entity. It assumes that certain characteristics are inherently part of the core being of a group. The idea of authenticity, a notion that implies essence, can derive from an idea that a particular group and individual entities of that group can be recognized by the ways in which they are shown with some message of the real or authentic or essential qualities of that group. Spike Lee is an insider-outsider. He's an insider of the black community, but outsider of the underclass community. He came from a middle-class background and now a part of very affluent background. So we have to ask ourselves, what is an authentic or realistic story of a group? And should it be told by a person within that group? So do you have to be an insider to have legitimacy in storytelling? Can a man tell a woman's story? Can a white person tell a story of a black community and other types of groups? What are the positive and negative possible outcomes of an outsider telling the story? Again, they'll bring different perspective that maybe the insider may not see. We also have to think about, what is a black film? What kind of characteristics must a black film have? Another question is there room for more than one black filmmaker? Is a black filmmaker's perspective the black perspective? Are they telling the story for all of us? And is it still black film if it is supported by white money and white backers? They have to support the story to then give money to finance the film. And if it's not a story they want to hear or don't agree with, does that make limitations in what black filmmakers can do? And lastly, how can and how does film shape politics? Again, this film was criticized by causing racial tensions, and a few years later, we see the Rodney King riots. Some have blamed this film and Spike Lee for race relations being so poor, but he was filming poor race relations before this riot occurred. So we have to ask ourselves, does media shape our social environments and interactions, or is film shaped by those same sociopolitical happenings in our country? Here's a quote by Terry Francis in Contemporary Black American Cinema that says, "Not only particular films, but also the histories of movie theaters offer ways to think about America's history with racial difference. Racial strife in America is encoded in the history of its spatial organization, whether in the domestic, commercial, religious, educational, or entertainment spheres." So again, this is referring to space. Where is it okay to show a black film? Can a black person see it in the same theater as a white person? Where can black people live and interact with various institutions? And is it the same as white communities?